should I have Welcome to Media Path. I am Louise Palanker.
I'm Fritz Coleman.
Did you know that you are currently enjoying show number 114? Fritz and I have scoured through movies, books, and television to locate for you the finest cuts of programming sustenance. And we've had the honor of talking with such icons as Henry Winkler, Pat Boone, Adam Schiff, Keith Morrison, and what's the math on this, 109 or 110 other fabulous people. So dive into our captivating catalog, subscribe, tell a friend, explore, and remember to hydrate. But before you do any of the above, keep listening to this particular episode because today on the show, we've got famous podcasting pioneers Tom and Dan, Tom Vann and Dan Dennis. Their show is called A Mediocre Time with Tom and Dan, and I don't want to question their judgment, but I actually had a fine time listening to them, and Fritz and I had a blast being guests on their show.
Very entertaining.
And now here they are returning that favor. But first, Fritz and I have some recommending to do. So, Fritz, what have you got?
All right, I'm going to talk about a movie that's only out in theaters right now. It's Tar, starring Cate Blanchett. She plays Lydia Tarr. Now, in the international world of classical music, she's considered one of the greatest living composer-conductors and the first ever female music director. What's fascinating about this film is it's all fiction. You are convinced that this woman really exists because she's connected to famous places, people, and events. Like she was the understudy for Leonard Bernstein in the New York Philharmonic, the Berlin Symphony, all fabrication. Lydia Tarr in this movie is about to hit the peak of her career by conducting a recording of Mahler's Fifth Symphony, when all of her dicey behavior in the past and present starts to haunt her all at once. Part of it has to do with the fact that she's a lesbian and she's married. This isn't a review, it's just a warning. The farther you get into the movie, the more confusing it becomes. I'm telling you right up front. The plot points never get resolved. Questions go unanswered. However, I don't know that much about classical music, so what was interesting to me was learning the behind-the-scenes mechanics and the intrigues of that world. Cate Blanchett probably going to get a nomination or two. It is an acting tour de force. She speaks French and German and English in the film, fluidly morphing from one language to the other, all in the dialogue. It's written by Todd Field, who hasn't done a movie in 16 years. He did Little Children and In the Bedroom, two dark but really interesting movies. I basically comment about this one the same as I did Amsterdam. It holds true for both movies. You may not understand everything, but it's a masterclass in acting.
Well, I'm in it for all those languages because I get to read some subtitles and then it makes you feel like you're doing some reading.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, I have watched on Hulu a documentary called God Forbid, the sex scandal that brought down a dynasty. And you have seen this as well, Fritz?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So how do I describe this one? Imagine you are a 20-year-old pool boy at the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami, and an attractive older woman invites you up to her room for sex, which I suppose is sort of par for the pool boy course. Now imagine you start getting into it and she says, "Oh, hey, do you mind if my husband watches?" Well, yeah, you do, but you don't mind more than you want the sex. You are, after all, a 20-year-old pool boy. The training brochure literally says this job comes with sex. Now imagine the attractive lady enjoys herself immensely, as does her husband, who spends the encounter with his pants down, enjoying himself immensely. They book a series of follow-up visits before you come to understand that the attractive lady is growing increasingly attached and falling in love with you. And if you didn't initially catch her name, it's Becky Falwell, and the guy with his pants down in the corner is Jerry Falwell Jr. Giancarlo Granda is pulled deeper and deeper into the Falwell well. They keep him close by lavishing him with travel and luxury. They invest in his real estate dreams, introduce him to important figures and captains of industry. And as he begins to grow up, pull away, and get his own girlfriend, they reveal to him that Jerry and Becky have been filming their sexual encounters. They threaten him and put the squeeze on him financially. The pressure ratchets up considerably when Team Trump uses knowledge of the throuple to coerce an endorsement out of Falwell and his evangelical power pulpit inherited from Jerry Falwell Sr. and centered around the evangelical stronghold of Liberty University. Giancarlo found himself within the crosshairs of not just Jerry Falwell Jr., but also now the president of the United States. His exit strategy was telling the truth, which you will see in this documentary and in his book, Off the Deep End, Jerry and Becky Falwell, and the collapse of an evangelical dynasty. So for me, the scandal is not in the sexual details, because whatever between consenting adults, it's in the manipulation of this young man and the hypocrisy of a couple who forbade any sexual activity outside of marriage at their university while engaging in plenty of it, and endorsing a presidential candidate who did the same and also bragged about abusing women. Your views on this scandal may vary, but I found it to be an important lesson in power dynamics for you young folks at home or in some bigwig's hotel room. Sex with anyone who can hold sway over you, your free will, or your future is a bad idea. Be careful in there.
Good point. I love this because, I'm a big fan of hypocrisy exposed. And there's another one just like it. The Hillsong Church, which is this big, phenomenal church that was started in Australia by a father, and very similar to Liberty, was passed off to his son.
Okay.
And now his son runs the whole thing. And then this particular thing is about this rock star-like minister that was the pastor at the New York chapter of this church, and how he got into some sexual malfeasance. And it's just hypocrisy, and it's fun. It makes you smile. I mean, it doesn't matter what religion you're in. It's the same in all religions, but it's funny.
Right. We do all have to be careful. So God Forbid is on Hulu, and I'd like to introduce our guests, if I may.
Let's get these boys on here.
These are charismatic leaders in their own right. A Mediocre Time with Tom and Dan is an award-winning podcast and radio show that you can watch live on Twitch. Tom Vann and Dan Dennis have been blazing a glorious trail in audio entertainment, pulling radio, kicking and screaming into the podcast age. Their fans are legioned and loyal. Their exploits are legend and can be located at tomanddan.com. To help folks regulate to your tone, Tom and Dan, I will read a selected excerpt from your website entitled How to Listen, : It's more than easy to join Tom and Dan and listen to the show live every Friday at 12 p.m. on Twitch. First, check to make sure that it is Friday. This can easily be done by using a calendar or by calling a close friend. So you call your listeners scumbags, endearingly. You encourage fans to drink and listen, and it feels like you guys are bringing the tone and tenor of broadcast old-school morning show radio to the land of audio on demand. You're on Twitch. You have an app. Folks can chat with one another. What all else is going on as you stream live?
Oh man! Well, hey, first of all,
what an intro!
My God, we have never had two people that we actually. First of all, I have to say that we truly admire the way that you guys deliver your show and how professional and how it's just I'm just watching you in awe.
I forgot we were guests. I was
really
just listening to your good.
I was like, damn, I'm gonna subscribe to this when I'm done. It's really good.
But I'll tell you, you have there's a great documentary about you guys on YouTube, and you guys are huge. I mean, you have your own day in Orlando, Florida. We're not playing around with a couple of dozen listeners. You have thousands of listeners, and you do these events like we'll talk about at the Hard Rock where thousands of people show up, and it's an event, and you have... and the thing that Wheezy and I both found is interesting, because we're both, and I promise I'll get a question out. Just give me a second. Go out for a sandwich.
You can pontificate. Go.
But we were both fascinated by the fact that you guys started in terrestrial radio and made a very successful transition over into podcast. And we should all be as successful as you have been in conquering this new form. It's really amazing. All that to say, you guys started in terrestrial radio. Talk about your start.
Well, it's funny because I was actually Daniel's intern in radio when back in 2003.
Yeah, this is back in, like in the late 90s and early 2000s. You abused your intern and you gave him some sort of wacky name, some name to belittle him and to make him feel like the dirt that he is.
Hey, you didn't make the rules. You're just playing by them. I get it.
And even though this person's parents are probably spending in upwards of $20,000 to $25,000 to send them to a university, we take these university students and we put them in as an intern at a radio station. Then we belittle them and make them get, I don't know, a ham bagel or hot sauce.
Wait.
Rolling mousetrap.
What was his humiliating nickname, please?
Drunky the Bear.
Yeah, but let's not kid ourselves with the name Drunky the Bear. This guy was more than an intern.
Yeah.
And
That's a character. We're going to talk about him.
He was a stunt man.
Oh my God.
And that's the thing about Tom is that
it's amazing you can sit up and respond to a conversation after the stuff you put yourself through.
I mean, he can give you the rundown of injuries he has.
I'll forget my grandkids' names, but right now I'm good.
I was a producer for a big time morning show, The Monsters in the Morning, on WTKS Real Radio 104.1 in Orlando. And then Tom always wanted to be in radio. And there was really not much of a difference other than I'd been in the business longer and I'm older and smaller.
And we had an advantage in the fact that, and this will lead to our podcast success, but it was the only talk radio show in town. So there was a huge listener base, and me and Daniel worked together for 10 years. And back in the middle of us working together in 2009, Daniel, he was the producer of the show, the executive producer, and he, an audio engineer, brilliant at editing audio, everything. He's that side of the business of our business, and he had a studio in his house. And one day in 2009, and it was kind of like when podcasting was very at the infancy, like Corolla, Marin, Rogan.
Rogan had just started.
Right.
Marin was like 2 years in. Let's see.
Yeah,
the big ones were Jimmy Pardo.
Yeah.
He was a big one. I'm trying to think of the guys that did it a little bit earlier than Marin, but I had a studio that I would do parody songs in.
Yeah.
And like little, and my own music because I was a musician. So I would and by studio, I mean I had an interface and I had a computer, And then years of playing drums because I'm a percussionist. I had microphones and cords and cables and guitars and amps. So we just put it all together on a Tuesday and we recorded on a Thursday.
Yeah, and then we decided hey, let's just record a podcast and see where it goes just for fun after we're done with our shifts on Friday. Let's try to do this. And we literally were like, we didn't even have any structure. We're just like, let's turn it on. We did 2 breaks. It's funny because
standard radio dum-dums.
We literally now it's been 13
years.
13 plus years. And we have the same format with our podcast where it's basically 3 segments, 2 breaks,
and 4 new songs from people that were allowed to play their music.
And we started that in 2009 just as a hobby. And it's funny because as you guys know, in radio and mainstream media, they throw out these numbers and that are gigantic. And there were these huge numbers that were always thrown out, like you have this many listeners. And then as social media and the company and iHeart, it used to be Clear Channel, started getting more into websites and promoting the web, and we went through all that at the time. When we started in 2003 and stuff, they barely had websites for the radio shows, and it was that we were still using mini discs and things like that. Like Daniel, he just stopped cutting tape.
Yeah, I still know how to cut tape. You guys know how to cut tape?
Oh yeah, I still have some tape around my neck. I can't remember where it goes.
You guys benefited from having developed your chemistry in terrestrial radio before you came over to the podcast, so you hit the ground running. But my contention has always been you can't really manufacture chemistry. You guys have great chemistry. It's just this organic thing that has to occur where it's, you can read one another's thoughts, you bounce back and forth, you finish each other's sentences. You can't fake that. I mean, I worked with people on TV and they tried to fake chemistry between anchor people and all that, and it just never worked. But you have that worked out. But I also find interesting your personalities and what drove you to the industry. For instance, Dan, you were short. You still are short, to my knowledge, and since last we spoke. But
shorter.
Wow. But you were bullied as a kid, and you, like I did, I didn't even have the benefit of being short. I was tall and got the shit slapped out of me when I was in high school. You got beat up, and in order to protect yourself in circumstances, you used your wits. I so identify with that.
Yeah, you talk your way out of stuff.
You were painfully shy and sort of an antisocial kid, and so this is you conquering one of your great fears, being a personality and being in front of people and all that. So it's really an interesting dynamic between both of you.
We appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you.
also, you're right in the fact that working, in terrestrial radio, they do these. It's absurd. It's like. And when we used to do the morning show, it was 5 hours. Like, it was from
5 hours.
It was from 6 to 11, and so 5 hours, 5 days a week. So when you have that many hours and you fill that much time, and you guys are familiar with like these huge, gigantic chunks of like morning drive and stuff like
so much.
And when you do that Monday through Friday, we worked together for 10 years. I think we did 6 before we started the podcast,
True.
and then now we're doing 5 hours, 5 days a week, and a 2-hour podcast at the end of the week.
Yeah.
That many reps will make you better. Like, and
that's interesting.
like, I guess that's the one thing I tell everybody. I'm like, even if no one's listening, if you want to start a podcast or start anything, just do it and do the reps, because
keep going through the motions.
That will
great
help
note.
tremendously.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I wanted to talk a little bit for our listeners who are not maybe as familiar with old school radio from the inside out, because a lot of people listen to the radio but didn't work in it the way we all did. So for folks who listen to the radio but did not work in radio, back in the day when everyone in town picked from a few local stations and listened live, a morning show team would wake up in the middle of the night, put on a 4-hour show trying desperately to be fun, funny, engaging, and entertaining. While doing that live, they may get a call from their boss yelling at them because he's been yelled at by his boss or whatever corporate or ego influence was involved. And then the morning guys would have to carry on being funny within that tense and limiting culture. Is that what compelled you to first dip your toe in the podcast waters, that hope of freedom?
Well, I mean, like for us, are you going to talk about the events?
Well, yeah, we never had any aspirations of turning the podcast into a business. When we started, it was not like, hey, we start this, it'll turn into something, and then we can do this for a living.
The business is just what came, and unfortunately now we're trying to figure it out. I mean, we have this thing, and we're trying to figure it out.
But we didn't even think that was possible because at the time, like, we were getting a couple thousand downloads a week, but, in perspective-wise, we were being told that, like, oh, your radio show you're on has hundreds and hundreds of thousands of listeners.
Hundreds of, if not millions of listeners.
Yeah, and so that's the numbers that kept being thrown out. And then we're like, oh, we're only getting 2,000 to 5,000 downloads a week. That's nothing. Yeah. And now in today's terms, it's huge. But so back then we were like, oh, this is not. But what changed is we had after a year of doing the podcast, and then, like I said, it was just for fun. We decided like, hey, let's do a meetup.
Yeah, let's just see some of these guys that listen to the show.
Let's go to a local bar and then invite our listeners to come and have a beer with us. And when we did our first meetup, we had like 150 people show up, and
we drank the entire bar out of beer to the point where they closed the doors and said, "Hey, can you do this next week?" And we're like, not here.
But that's a great way to learn what your demographic is. Get eyes on your audience and see. That's probably a great idea.
And it also taught us because
right?
That same week we did a radio promotion at a local wing bar, and
a big chain.
And me and Daniel were there, and
crickets.
5 people showed up.
Nobody there.
It was the promo tent. They hand out the free garbage.
We even had the cute girls with the calendars. Yeah. We had the whole 9 yards, and nobody came.
And then we were like, wait a minute. We did this promo that they've been promoting. 5 people showed up, and then we do our podcast. Same people, same town, and 150 people showed up. And then that told us, like, whoa, like, our listeners for the podcast are way more engaged and way more interested in our success and want to support us. They knew we were on our own, and then we thought, we were like, man, there's something
they're
here.
Active. They're busier. They're into it.
That's really interesting.
And that told us that the type of listener matters, and then not necessarily the number that you throw out there. And we started to realize, like, wait a minute, there are not hundreds of thousands of listeners, because we started looking at our own social media. We're like, and talking about stunts, like, I jumped Gravedigger at the Monster Jam here, and
he did many times.
So
actually.
I jump over Gravedigger on a scooter, which is like ridiculous, and we put the video on YouTube, and it's got 5,000 views. views.
That's a decent amount, but not for people that have millions of listeners.
And I'm like, I don't think this radio station has hundreds of thousands of listeners. If only 5% are not going on YouTube to look at me do this.
Yeah,
that's the sales department lying.
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah, and we learned that, but I mean, in radio, it kind of pulled the curtain back a little bit, and we realized that all of the web impressions, all of the
Arbitron ratings and stuff,
all of it is it's inflated, it's equations,
smoke and mirrors.
Real.
Yeah,
it's not real.
Yeah.
But you guys have monetized your show because you do your own salesmanship, right? You've learned that rather than having national sponsors, your greatest penetration would be local retail people, and you sell your own spots. And I can't imagine how hard that is to operate your show and then have to go out and sell spots and glad hand.
We're finding that out. It's hard, man.
Yeah, and luckily, after years, we started just doing it only me and Daniel. We were the only two people that built this business. Now we have help after years of building it.
But not as many as we probably should have.
But you mentioned the sales part. The greatest thing that mainstream media could have ever done for me, like Clear Channel, iHeart, whatever, was underpay me while I worked for radio, because I started learning the only way I was going to make money was through live reads and promos, right? You get in radio business, you get $300 for a 2-hour promo for standing at a gas station or being at a car lot or whatever.
It's $150 an hour. At least it used to be. It's probably higher now.
Or you get $20 a live read. This is some behind the scenes radio stuff. So I realized if I can go out with the radio salespeople and then sell myself and get to know the sales business, maybe I could just make the money, because I was making $25,000 a year base salary, but I was able to make another $25,000 in promos and live reads,
endorsements.
So I would just
hustling.
I would just go with every salesperson to every sales meeting, and I learned the sales part of it. So then when we were forced, and that's another interesting story, because the podcast, and we were doing the podcast and the radio show simultaneously for 3-4 years, and it finally got to the point where some of the personalities we work with or whatever weren't happy with the fact that we were doing this, and it was getting more popular. We were selling T-shirts and stuff. So
we were blowing merch out of my garage. We were selling hats and T-shirts, and we had stickers everywhere and magnets.
And that's when we were kind of really getting excited about the promotion part of it. We were like, hey, this building. That's when Clear Channel was basically someone from our show that we were on tried to sabotage us and say that us cursing was going to cause the whole station a problem, and that was a big thing.
Because they were trying to kind of weave together the illusion that our clients, current clients of the radio station, were so dumb, which is very insulting to your clients, to say that you're so stupid that you think that audio from our podcast is us cursing on the radio, or potential clients or new clients.
Yeah, that they were going to hear us cursing, because you know how the business is. Other, your opposition in other radio stations will find audio and send it to FCC to try to get you fined.
Or a political campaign.
Yeah. But what I loved about in learning about your sales technique there was that you swear a lot in your commercials. But the thing is, that's what makes them memorable. And many times, and somebody was describing it in the documentary, that sometimes you'll do a spot and you were a little blue in this commercial, and it turned out that it had more impressions, and the listeners liked it even more. And so the sponsor comes back and said, "Please swear more in our commercial," because it makes an impression.
Yeah, that's actually our realtor. He is still a client, still with us, and he just preferred us to be us instead of being the corporate version of us. He just basically told us, and then we realized, hey, just talk to your audience, make the commercials funny, screw up, whatever, do unconventional, be real, just be authentic,
and then that will resonate more, and people will remember it more. And it turned out to be the case. And it's funny because we started doing this so much that sometimes we go opposite and do straight ones because it's too predictable.
We got to give them something different. So sometimes we're all business.
But talk about this a little bit, because I just think it's an interesting dynamic that you have these kind of bloated, if you will, ships of industry who, like the music industry and the radio industry, that didn't really want to begin steering, like make a course correction, like, 15 years ago when it was clear. But they were holding on to their jobs until retirement or what have you. But to see that streaming was the future, how many guys like you have jumped off and started your own thing? Because I don't think it's that common.
It's so, like, a lot of people, we were lucky timing wise.
Yeah,
and
we really were.
And we were kind of lucky that they forced us out at the time they did, because it's not like podcasts are getting more popular now. I mean, they are, but there's too many of them.
There's so many.
So at the time when we were basically forced out and forced to make this a business, we're talking about 10 years ago, 2012, when Daniel left. Another thing that is a dirty little secret in radio is they stagger your contracts so that you have no power. You can't leave together.
Yeah, you can't leave together.
So,
if my contract's
so interesting.
Isn't it great? If my contract's up in 2012 and Tom's contract's up in 2013, then we can't leave at the same time because he won't be able to eat for a year.
Yeah, we had to, that's what we had to do. So in an effort to we also didn't want to burn any bridges, because it was like, we didn't know anybody who started a podcast business, and like we knew that like Corolla and Marin and Rogan,
but we're not them.
Yeah, but they're 1,000 times bigger than us, so we were like a little hesitant, but we knew we had to give it a try. Also we were just about to have kids at the time, and so it was a rough go.
I had just bought a house. I mean, but I was like, if I can speak for me. At the end of my deal, I was so dissatisfied with radio. I didn't like the way it was going. I didn't like the way I was treated. And then I was looking at my new deal, and of course they wanted to kind of ink me for 3 more years. And I'm like, man, I don't think I can do this. Yeah, for the
and
same
your wife
salary.
said so in the documentary. She's like, he's not permitted to do this because I have to live with him, and it's not healthy.
And I want to talk about that, if you don't mind.
Please.
Tom's wife in the documentary, and I thought the part where you sort of exposed the audience to your family dynamic was really touching and very cool, because it's so antithetical to the way you guys are on the air. But I think it was Tom's wife that said having children really changed him and made him grow up a little bit. So tell me what she was talking about, and if you agree with what she said, Tom.
Well, it has, and obviously I think it does to everybody.
Yeah.
Some people doesn't. You go out to buy a pack of cigarettes, you never come back. But I think it was just, when I started in the entertainment business, I was doing the stunts, and it was like, like the party and I always thought, I was like, well, this isn't going to last that long. Right. But as you get older, and then when my wife got pregnant, it really did hit home like, man, well, I can't just be willy-nilly, every year could be different. Like, well, I'll just go with the flow. Yeah. And then it was like, I have to build something.
To plan something.
And also, it scared me too, because radio, and me and Daniel have always talked about this, like, you don't even know when your last day of work is. Like, there's... Like, every day you do a show, you could walk out of that studio and they're waiting for you to fire you, because
we're going Spanish sports starting tomorrow. Thanks for your service.
Zero equity. You have built characters and ideas and a persona, and you have people that count on you every morning, right? And they love you. But if the station isn't succeeding, none of that matters.
And you have a non-compete, so you can't even get a job in the same area that people know you.
You can't even say goodbye. At least for me, they didn't bank on social media being as popular, and social media has a big part of why people found me, because I left and they did everything they could
to never speak. They told I was still on the show. I had to work there for another year, but they were like, don't talk about Daniel.
Yeah, he never worked here. He didn't exist.
This is what radio does. Like, when they fire someone, or they won't sign their contract, force them out or whatever, like in Daniel's case, then they think that, if we don't talk about them, then the listeners will forget, and then they won't know. But Daniel just went on social media and it's like, hey, I'm doing a podcast now.
Come over here.
And then everybody's like, all right.
We had that same circumstance just play out here in Los Angeles, where we had a female TV anchor that worked on one of our stations, and she was very popular, and she got fired, and they told her co-anchor, who happened to be a very close friend of hers, don't mention anything about it. He violated it and went on the air and said, you people didn't even allow her the opportunity to say goodbye to our listeners. It was awful. You can't do that. So they fired him. That following Monday, they fired the guy. So she lost her job. He lost his job because he went on the air and he completely went against what the corporate policy was and said you should let her say goodbye. And now then neither of
How's
them.
their podcast? They should start a podcast.
But it's disrespectful to listeners to
No, it really is.
just sort of assume that they're so mindless that they would just new reality, I will adjust accordingly. Like they're humans. I think that's really sad that you would think that people would just forget a person. Yeah. When you love a show, you're still kind of mourning the cancellation of the Munsters or whatever, like 40 years later. Why did they take that show off? I love that. I mean, you love it forever if you love it.
Yeah, it was a weird time, and I never got to say goodbye. They did something where you kind of got to say like a weird.
Well, I had to lie because I was terrified because when I waited out my whole year, and then I knew I was like, well, we're gonna make a run at this podcast business, but I don't want Clear Channel finding out that because we were terrified that they were.
They said they alluded that they would sue us.
Well,
So is that part of the non-compete clause? Is a podcast included in that?
It's muddy, and we talked to lawyers, and they were like, "This is never. There's no precedent to this.
It wasn't written that way."
They're like, technically, they say like, yeah, you, but the internet, like, where is the server? Like, we started looking at things like, well, technically, our servers are out of Orlando or Atlanta.
I moved our server to Atlanta, so we weren't broadcasting in Orlando.
Wow, it's all new law, right? And it's like also, what about ownership of bits or concepts or whatever, intellectual property and that kind of thing?
Yeah, they tried to lock all of my bits, all my dumb characters.
So we it's interesting because still to this day, I don't know of a case where some a popular radio show or a radio personality left to do a podcast and they tried to come after them for a non-compete because it legally I think it's super tough because it's all written for terrestrial radio.
Right.
And then when you start talking about the internet, it's like, okay, well, where is it being broadcast to and from? It's the whole world. It's instantly accessed by the entire world as soon as you put it on the internet. So is that non-compete? How could you could be broadcasting from Russia
anywhere,
and technically you could hear us in Orlando. So it's like, is that non-compete?
Actually, we are broadcasting from Russia right now.
And it turns out that you were competing with them and you compete and beat them. So the third act of this movie is you beat them at their own game, which is kind of cool.
And then they welcome you back, on your own terms, right? With the corporate.
A couple people welcomed us.
Okay.
We do broadcast our clean podcast, Corporate Time with Tom and Dan. That's broadcast on the radio, although it has more actual podcast listeners, and most of our listeners listen to podcasts. But we play, like, me and Daniel are never about burning bridges, and we want to, for business-wise.
He's not. I burn a few. I'm more the little emotional bridge burner, and then he tells me to burn bridges, and I put out the fires.
But it is interesting what we found now as, in 2022, there is just so much content that now it's hard because it's like navigating a world where everybody's attention is being taken by their phone, by social media, by TikTok videos, by Instagram videos,
by Reels,
10 million podcasts. Every single celebrity has a podcast. I didn't foresee people doing podcasts for no financial reasons. Like, celebrities are doing podcast content and they're not for no payment or anything. Like, I thought
they're bored.
Vanity project. Yeah.
So it's like now navigating a new world where there's infinity content out there. Now it's like it's about keeping and curating our own listener base and just keeping that as strong as possible. And it's like it is different. And people that we have plenty of old radio friends that have left radio or been fired and started their own podcast, and they've like, well, it seems a lot easier for you guys. And I'm like, well, doing it now is different than 10 years ago.
It is.
Because there's just a lot more. Like even 10 years ago, or when we started the podcast in 2009, people were like, Pod Nest, what is that?
Yeah.
They didn't even know what it was.
Yeah, people didn't didn't know what it was. And now, now that we've been doing it for 12, 13 years, there are people that I know that are famous that are starting podcasts now, radio famous, I'll say. And I feel for them because it's really, really hard to
It is,
get.
and they don't realize how much work it is. It's a lot of work, especially if you don't have a staff of producers helping you.
And
It's
we
hard.
wear so many hats. We do have a producer, Samantha, and she's awesome. We do have a social media guy. We have a merch guy. That's really about it. Whereas about normal days, we run, we're pushing, 5 to 7 shows out of here a week, and we're a 3-person team. And we're broadcasting in upwards to 25 to 40 hours a week.
Yeah, I do.
And you guys diversify. You were talking about a corporate time, which is the clean version of your show, which is on radio, right? You also do soccer. And you also do
the soccer. Oh, sorry. I'll let you finish. Sorry.
And then I could be wrong about this, but also you have the Gentleman's Guide to Manliness, which sounds awesome. What's that all about?
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah, we did that for a while. The soccer show, it's funny. We did that show to kind of subsidize Daniel's salary for a little while with the local soccer team while I was waiting out my contract.
Yeah, we have an MLS franchise, the Orlando City Lions, and we actually, we would write commercials for them, and we do advertising campaigns. We helped launch the 2015 bid of MLS here in Orlando. We would do whatever it took to get money, whatever it took to get the podcast moving, we would do it.
Yeah.
Can you do kind of like merchandise or just sort of like exchanges where, since you guys are a lifestyle and a culture, that if you guys like it, then people who like you will like it?
I think so, yeah. Most of our listeners are like us.
Yeah, and that's what we've realized. Since our content is not about any particular topic, we do talk about general pop culture and stuff going on in society, but most of the time, like you mentioned the documentary, we talk about our own personal lives, and we are
talk about
open.
our lives.
Like, we tell embarrassing...
That's what was refreshing about it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, we tell honest stuff about raising our kids, and we're also very blue, but it's funny because we have this reputation, our listeners have this reputation as like party animals and stuff. Like, I'm married to I've never had any other girlfriend besides my wife. Like,
don't tell them that.
I met my wife in high school, and I've been married to her ever since. And then it's like,
and my wife is the biggest nerd, 4.0. Doesn't drink, doesn't do nothing, never tried drugs in her life. Boy,
keeps you in the guardrails, man. That's good. You're better off.
But because of our jokes and our blue comedy, people like, oh, these guys are they're crazy, wild party animals.
But we overshare about things that I think a lot of people can identify with. Like I would say that Tom overshares about certain aspects of his life and his relationship with his wife that no one would ever talk about let's say your lack of emotion or your wife wanting you to be more of a certain thing. And me, I overshare about my anxiety, and I'm overly emotional, right? And I'm like the girl of the relationship with my wife, and my wife's a lot more like Tom. And we overshare these things, and most of the time we find out that our listeners are either a Tom or a Dan or a combo.
Oh, they love it. That's very endearing. That's what made Howard Stern so famous, I think.
The vulnerability.
He was very, regardless of how brazen he was, he would share about his medical stuff and all kinds of things, and I think people connected to that.
And I also think that since men maybe with their male friendships have a hard time opening up about some of the stuff that matters the most, you guys talking about it opens that door to where, it's super fine to admit that, you're a little bit weirded out by spiders or whatever that is that would make you, not so He-Man, but you guys make it okay.
Fear of flying that we used to talk about all the time. It's always, I don't like flying. I had a bad experience, and we talk about that. But then I get an onslaught of emails from people that have the same fear, and I think we do that a lot.
And what's interesting is that we've found, just like society and social media is fractured off, we've got now these subgroups of our listeners, we call them BDMs, but the subgroups now, we have an anxiety group. We've got a parenting group.
We have a gardening, gambling, cars,
outdoors, and there's all these like
with hundreds of people in each group.
Our listeners have all like found like-minded things, and then like as a whole, they all listen to the show, but they're all into these small little genres.
Crazy things, swingers, board games, playing cards. It's
so. Wait, so where are these chat rooms? Is it when you're on Twitch, and like how does it work? So you're on Twitch, you have an app. Folks can chat with one another.
Facebook,
Facebook mostly.
We started a members only BDM group, Facebook group years ago, and it was kind of on the fly. Like, hey, we should put all our if you're a paying member.
It was so casual.
That was our first business, was because when we were under contract, we couldn't get any advertisers because they'll definitely, as you guys know, if you mess with their money and their advertisers, they will sue you out of existence.
They will get you good.
We also know that they have an infinite amount of money and lawyers that they will never have a chance. But so we stayed away from advertisers, but we started a subscription service where you get an extra show and you become like a member of. It was $2.95 a month, and actually we built it while we were working for the radio station, and we just held on to it. And when Daniel left, we pulled the trigger, and then we were like, hey, you want to support Daniel? Now he left, like, subscribe to our show.
Yeah, and that was the single greatest thing we ever did, was that we put one tweet out there saying, hey, if you were looking for Dan, well, you can help him by supporting this new subscriber base. It's an extra show. You get an extra show.
And we made it cheap.
Yeah, you get $2.95. You get to part of a community, and then we rolled in older shows.
And then so we started a Facebook group with just those members, and then throughout the years we realized like those members, and then we started the smaller groups of the interests.
They'd write us and say like, hey, I think I got like 50 or 60 guys that want to start like a Mitsubishi Eclipse group. And I'm like,
okay,
start a Mitsubishi Eclipse
I'll
group.
tell you what, it's mind-blowing how devoted your fans are. I mean, there are guys out there with Tom and Dan tattoos.
Oh yeah,
it's unbelievable.
And that's where we realized, like, we're all and we tell our listeners all the time, like, and that's what dumbfounds us about, mainstream big corporate media, is that they, like, I remember some head, general manager one time, she was talking about, like, the people that text in the texting service, or the callers, or whatever, the emails you get, that's only a small percentage of your audience. You got this huge audience.
Less than 1%.
Yeah, that's less than 1%. You get this huge audience. But I was always like, yeah, but those are the people that care. Those are the people that care enough to email you, to use your sponsors.
They're using their thumbs to talk to you. What's wrong with you?
Like, those people are worth 100 listeners who don't you don't call in or participate. You know what I'm saying? Like,
good point.
So we realized a long time ago, like, the people that are paying $10.90 or $2.95 a month, those are the only listeners that matter, because those are the people that are buying or using our sponsors.
They're here
and buying our shirts and going to the events. So we just started catering straight to them and telling them, like, hey, you guys are our boss. We don't work for a company anymore, so we'll listen to you. So tell us what you want and we'll do it. And like, every one of you guys matter. Like, even though it's only thousands of you, like, you guys are our business, and that's what changed.
Fritz and Louise, you guys will like this, because he started doing something. I'm going to pay him a massive compliment. He started doing something that would make both of our fathers super duper proud. He just went back to old school, tried and true, really good, honest sales techniques, and he just said, we have to have a level of accountability for any time we sell. When we started selling commercials, we would do ways for our clients to let us know that one of our listeners came through the door. Something as simple as like leaving a box of Tom and Dan koozies at, like, let's say a store. And then that way,
we told our listeners, hey, go get a koozie.
Go get one.
And then they would support it. They're like, I'll go get a koozie. And then the advertiser, the store would be like, man, we had 100 people this month coming to get a koozie.
This is the same stuff my dad did in like the 50s, 60s, and 70s to sell stuff. I mean, this is not rocket science. It's just accountability and doing a good job.
It's face-to-face, and it's also, it kind of like measures sort of how we brand ourselves in kind of a way. So when we were kids growing up, you'd start to identify yourself around the music that you liked. And then you'd put the posters on your wall, and that was kind of your way of saying, I'm this person. I like Tom Petty, and there he is, and that's ownership. And so you kind of offer that. And not only do you offer that club membership of self-identity, that I feel like I'm a member of this community, but also you're making the best use of technology by allowing people to connect with each other. And I'm wondering what kind of stories you hear about people coming up and say, hey, we met through you guys, and tell us some of those stories.
Oh, we've got people. They met at because we used to do Tom and Dan cruises, and
we have tons of people married.
Oh yeah, we have
tons of people married.
We've had tons of people like get engaged on our cruises.
More
at events. Like we'd bring them up on stage, and like they met at a Tom and Dan event.
We can't even count them.
Got married, and then now come to events. Like we're doing a big free beer fest and sofa races coming up in next weekend.
Sofa races.
Yeah, they're local.
Tell me how that works.
Oh, the Sanford, Florida sofa races are the greatest redneck hillbilly. I mean,
oh my God.
Man, we should just fly you guys here.
Oh, for sure.
Yes.
Oh, for sure.
You would love it. But
they show up with kids they have, and they met at an event that we've been doing this a while, and now they have kids, and then so it's like, we really are lucky that the community of listeners that we have are so good. But like we've talked about this before, they're like us because all we talk about is our own lives. So it makes sense that they're like-minded. So it makes sense that we like our listeners because they're us.
I love that.
Tom, I got to talk about, you're a self-described adrenaline junkie. And I mean, as Drunky the Bear and otherwise, you have done some jackass level stunts.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, I think you said in the documentary you've had 15 concussions or something like that. Talk about some of the most hilarious stunts or dangerous stunts you've ever done. And these are all at your live events, like at the Hard Rock or wherever, right?
Yeah, I mean,
you've had a lot of dangerous.
I would do the halftime show at the Monster Jam, the Monster Truck Show, and I think the most dangerous one I did was I told I always laugh about this too because I'm still confused how like they let me do these things because
a massive corporation.
Like this, like Live Nation owns the Monster Jam, a $1 billion company, and then iHeart.
So big now that they run Monster Jam as a season and they come through town twice.
I was a part-time employee, and they trusted me enough that I told them like I want to jump over a monster truck on a dirt bike, and like I barely know how to ride dirt bikes.
He's pretty good.
But it's not like I Travis Pastrana.
You're not a pro rider.
No. Like in fact, the day I jumped over 2 monster trucks, I had never even rode a 4-stroke dirt bike before. It was always like I had an old rusty 2-stroke dirt bike. So the first day I borrowed it from some client, some power sports store.
He borrowed some like $17,000 brand new 4-stroke.
They showed up the day of. The first time I even practiced riding it was the day I was going to jump the 2 monster trucks, and I remember the night like at halftime came and there's 70,000 people. I'm in a bear suit and I'm revving up the 4-stroke dirt bike, but I'm thinking it's a 2-stroke, and like a 2-stroke you have to keep revving it to keep it going. The 4-stroke, I looked down and it was overheating. Like the water was coming out of the radiator and stuff. I was like, oh, this thing is gonna stall. And then I went for it.
Just went for it.
I no practice, and I made it over the 2 monster trucks. And if I would have, like, Gravedigger was actually parked on top of the landing ramp, and I remember
thinking, an elevated kind of a deal.
I remember thinking, if I'm jumping like 50 feet, if I go through Gravedigger, it's just a series of like welded metal.
It's pipe. It's just big steel pipe, right? Or aluminum pipe or something.
I'm like, I could easily die or paralyze myself. And with the
He's
funny
wearing
part,
an old helmet, that white helmet you used to wear. That thing was so old it didn't have any concussive properties left in it.
and then all these radio, and that's the thing, like when as you guys know, back like we call it 90s radio, but it was like the stunt boy aspect. That's how we started like my career in radio, being an intern and doing the stunt aspect and wearing the bear suit. But I got to do all these cool things. But man, like there was a lot of them that I've got separated shoulder. Like now I'm paying for like my left shoulder. I had to get surgery, and now it's like it hurt real bad. I went to the doctor. He's like, "That's how you are now." Like, it'll never. He's like, "You will have to deal with this forever."
You are misaligned.
Yeah, you can hear it on the microphones. Like it's so loud now. If he gets it the right way, you can hear it.
Do you have to sign a waiver like with Live Nation when you're doing one of those?
It's funny because I would sign something, but now that I think back of it, like if I would have like paralyzed myself, like my wife and my family would have sued them. I mean, because someone would come in and be like, "What? You let this guy jump over monster? Like he has no training.
He's never ridden a 4-stroke dirt bike before.
He's a part-time employee. He's not even insured by you." Like it was insane.
And it's embarrassing to be. It's embarrassing to not be able to walk, but still be wearing the bear suit in the wheelchair.
But I'm glad I went through that experience just for the stories, but I don't think it'll ever be done again. I don't think they'll ever let radio intern do insanely dangerous stunts for billion-dollar corporations again.
Does your wife reject the idea of taking your life in your hands every time you do that stuff?
I think she liked it, dude.
Well, we were younger. I mean, now
I think it's kind of like my hero. I think she got a little like ooh la la,
Yeah, as you guys know, I had a different mentality in my 20s than I do now in my 40s. Yeah. So, there's no more of that. The most dangerous thing I do is probably eat red meat too much or have one too many beers.
Alcohol.
Yeah, it's no, with kids it changes everything.
So what is the future potential for new models of programming and advertising and revenue streams when you can have these 360 relationships with everybody?
We're trying to figure that out.
Yeah, that's a good question because I do think that there's some standard for a lot of companies that they should have a subscription model. I think that's very important. Some way to subscribe. We changed ours to a sliding scale a while back. We call it a love meter. So now. You can subscribe for $1.95 or $10.95.
Yeah, there's sort of a weird honor system in there. In that, if you really like the show, we're not really giving you anymore. We're just asking you to use your own honor system in your heart to maybe give us a little more because you use us a lot.
And everybody's financial situation is different.
Correct.
So some people pay $10.95, some people pay $1.95, but the mean rose by double.
Yeah.
So there's a benefit in having a sliding scale subscription system. I at least tell people
it's
that.
It's kind of empowering to the audience, too. That's kind of cool. It means you trust the audience and you're appealing to their good nature.
It's scary, too, though, Fritz, because when we added the 1095 and all the other subsequent additions that people could check, also we added the 195. So we could have people that were quite possibly paying 295 go down a tier.
Oh, and everybody could have.
We had a couple people do that, but to be quite honest, just because going on what Tom was saying earlier, with the listeners being us, I think we bet correct, and we kind of knew that they wouldn't do that they'd probably opt in to pay more.
And then there's the marketing of it, which is traditional commercials. We lucked out in the fact we talked to a lot of other national podcasts out there that have more listeners than us, but they're so spread apart, they're spread across the entire country that there's no real one pocket. Like we were lucky in the fact that since we did terrestrial radio in Orlando in this market for so long,
we're Southeast guys.
That the majority, I would say 80% of our listeners are in Florida and then in Central Florida. Yeah. So we're able to have a lot of local advertising. So essentially, we're running our business like a local radio station where 90% of our advertisers are local. So that is a benefit, like as compared to other people that have a national audience and they can only do national advertisers.
Yeah. And we can act really, really fast because it doesn't take long for us to cut a commercial, put you on the air, and you can see results like same day.
I tell people, what you guys have done really is a great template for people that want to grow a podcast. Whereas you work together in terrestrial radio, you developed your chemistry, you developed a fan base. And so when you switch to podcasting, it wasn't like you're starting from ground zero and nobody knows who you are, and you have to kind of carve your audience out of the small podcasting universe. You probably drew your terrestrial radio fans over to podcasting who might not otherwise have come to podcasting. So the way you did it was brilliant. I mean, it really was. Not everybody's going to have the benefit of being able to be on a terrestrial radio for 4 or 5 years to figure out what they're doing.
We hear that. When we win awards, other podcasts say that.
Yeah, but I do tell the podcast, like, you can build your audience, and I try to tell them, like, nowadays you got to go for something more specific. Like, we kind of have old school like talk radio show where it's just guys messing around, talking about.
It's a little too broad, right?
Everything. Like now it seems like you got to pick maybe a specific subject and get into there and get into that community.
Like
but
hamsters. If you did a hamster podcast, nobody's doing that.
But
Right.
I do tell other smaller podcasts, I'm like, man, like, okay, bars, like if a local bar or restaurant, I'm like, if you have, I tell this all the time, like if you have a couple hundred listeners only to your podcast, you can make money off of that.
Yeah.
Because if
Can you get 20 people in a bar?
yeah, if 20 people will meet you for a beer or a bar, like that bar paid the radio station $2,000 to get the same result, and if they pay you $500,
Exactly.
and it's just about the grind. I'm like, well, maybe you're not making $300,000 a year, but can you make 60 grand a year?
Yeah,
I
and
think
be your own boss and set your own schedule. And
I am convinced you can make 60 grand a year off 1,000 listeners off your podcast. It does help if they're local, but if you get a local 1,000 listeners, which is not like totally insane, right? I think it's
Totally
achievable,
doable, yeah.
and you can make a good living just off that, and it really, it's not like the numbers in the past where you need thousands and tens of thousands.
Yeah.
It's like,
and then it turns out,
can you get 800?
Yeah, but also those numbers were fake. Remember, if you're
Right. I should know the answer to this question, Wheezy, but I don't. Are there companies that you could hire to shop your podcast to retail people in your area? I mean, like, they used to have media companies that would do that for a television station. Do they have that for podcasting?
I'm sure they do. I mean, I earlier on we got hit up by everybody.
Well, what they do have is like you guys know, is like the podcast network business has exploded, because a lot of people, though, we're also lucky in the fact that I really enjoy the business aspect, and then Daniel could give two shits about the business.
I don't like it.
And he likes the engineering aspect, and then the sound, and like making the show look
cameras
good.
and that stuff.
And so that helps that we both stay in our lanes and work together. But the podcast networks, basically they promise, like, hey, join our network and then we'll give you commercials instead of going out and get your own. But the problem is they undercut, like they'll give you a smaller percentage of the cut.
They'll do like CPM model.
Yeah,
Right,
and then
right,
it's
right.
like they're paying you, like $7 per 1,000 download. And for a real small podcast, you're like, well, you're giving me $7. I only have 1,000
And I don't
listeners.
think that's fair. If I could talk about the $7 for a second, it's not fair. If you're a new podcaster and you're really excited about this, and certainly younger than we are, and you're not as bitter as we are, and you're just starting out, I mean, imagine how discouraging it would be if you really did have a good show. Let's say you did have 1,000 listeners locally, and you didn't know you could live off of that, but you're getting these bigger companies coming to you and saying, yeah, I'll give you $7. That'd be so discouraging, and it would kill you. You wouldn't want to ever do it.
But like a local air conditioning company or a local plumber or whatever, those 1,000 people that you have, if they buy a new AC or like that,
5 ACs, and that guy's locked in for life.
That
Seriously.
represents like the tens of thousands of dollars of business, and so you do have a advertising revenue potential greater than a lot of people realize, especially with the podcast, because your listeners are so engaged. Like that 1,000 listeners that you have on your podcast is probably equivalent to 20,000 radio listeners if they're passive.
That's very interesting.
Like podcasting to us is like concentrate.
Yeah.
Right.
It's
Yep.
Everybody's a little more plugged in, and let's think about that from
Right.
design. Like you have to go to the phone, you have to find the podcast, you got to, oh, there it is. I got to subscribe, I got to hit play.
You listen to the whole thing. You're not in and out of your car like radio's very passive, and podcasts are very like you push pause and you come back to it.
Right.
Yeah.
It's very purposeful, and especially if you're in. You want to know, like, oh, I didn't miss any of this because they're going to refer back to it, and I'm going to have to say, oh, I don't know what they're talking about because I didn't finish that episode. You want to keep up, And so, do you guys talk about local color, local news, or anything that's going on regionally?
Well, we do now more than we used to, because what we saw happening was like, there was a time where we were like top 15 podcasts in the country. Like we were hitting like iTunes. Number.
I think we hit 11.
11 one time in like comedy podcast category, which is huge. We're the Rogans and stuff.
I mean, to do that now, you'd have to be like, oh my God, you have to.
We'll never even get close.
You have to be Dave Chappelle to hit 11.
Yeah. But so there was a time where we were getting these huge downloads, but that was when there was less competition or less podcasts out there. And then so now it's definitely changed where, we saw that, okay, we're not going to be as popular nationwide with so many people doing this. So we're going to it's kind of like reverting back to, all right, what do we have that they don't? Well, we could talk about local Orlando that,
right.
Mark Maron's not talking about. So, but our listeners here in Orlando will appreciate that. It's kind of like podcasting is now reverting back to local radio.
Yes, you took the words right out of my mouth, because that's how terrestrial radio is surviving. You used to get like 10s and 12s in the numbers. Now you get 3 or 4, but if you carve out a solid 4, that's a huge number for your market, and just stay in your lane type thing.
Yeah, we talk about our lives mostly, but if there's something in the city that needs, or a client has something, we'll talk about it for sure.
And we do a lot of local events and stuff, so we've kind of gotten a lot more local, and we realize that that's our strength, and the fact that why try to be as broad as possible when we need to just keep our listeners that are here engaged.
It's like growing from local out is what you hope to do, instead of what we used to do is just cast the net all over and try to. And try to be the biggest thing in the world. You're not going to do that.
Well, do you find that because you're available on the internet that you've got people from around the world or from across the country who have checked in?
We do.
Yeah. We've got, you guys know how podcasting is interesting, because you can see where in the world they download. Yeah. So you can go, like we use Libsyn, whatever.
We've hit every country, I think, now.
Yeah, we've got especially like a lot of people like in the service that are like in Germany and South Korea. And
then you get that one weird one sometimes that pops up in Iran, and you're like, oh my God, is that guy dead? Did they kill that guy?
You represent freedom to those people over there.
I guess. I'm like, who is that? I hope he didn't get killed for listening to us.
We've had like Australian listeners find our podcast, and like all over. We got a lot of British listeners.
Tons of British listeners.
Especially because they vacation in Orlando, and they found us and they started listening to us. So like we've been thinking about going to
We have a lot
England.
of Texas, because Texas is cowboy Florida.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah,
and
that's
so
cool.
It's interesting being able to see where your downloads are coming from. Something that like terrestrial radio never was able to give you. Like you could see exactly. All right, this is a true download from Albany or whatever. It's like you see exactly like this person is downloading.
This guy's downtown Atlanta. It's like what? Really? That's crazy.
From Sweden.
Yeah, I mean, you can really use stats to fine tune your business model and to improve your game. So I think that's all so fascinating, and especially since you both have different skills and can complement one another in terms of your collaboration. But like I think we were talking about it earlier, but what I admire most is just kind of like the easy give and take of your conversation, that you have to be really confident to be comfortable with someone else weighing in and the back and forth, and knowing that he's going to give me my slot to finish this thought. He just had something he had to say right now, and you don't you never seem aggravated, and I think that's kind of the key to having good chemistry with a co-host. Is
and drafting on what you just said, I think was very important.
I was talking, Fritz. Do you mind?
Oh, I thought you were done.
No, I'm kidding.
You went down
That
at the
was-
end of the sentence and you looked away.
No, that's funny because I was just complimenting them and their ability to do it, and then I
thought you were complimenting me.
And then I was giving you an example of having no ability myself to allow you to
All
jump
right.
in.
Anyway, be that as it may, boys. One of the things that I was really impressed at, we did a little research on you guys before we were guests on your show and learned that you were sort of out of the morning zoo era of radio. And I've had some horrible experience with the morning zoo guys. They're a festival of snark and sarcasm, and it's always about them having to get the last word and get the joke in, and you can't win under those circumstances. But what I found so refreshing when we were guests on your show was that you were engaged, you were very easy conversationalists, and I think that's what, I mean, you're comfortable in your skin and we can have a conversation about anything, and I think that's to your benefit. You don't have to be, hammering people with a sledgehammer every 5 minutes.
That is such a nice compliment.
Yeah,
man.
we
God.
appreciate that. And
I'm gonna play that every morning when I wake up.
it's funny.
Oh,
It's funny you mentioned that because the whole name of our show, A Mediocre Time with Tom and Dan, is a kind of a joke, making fun of terrestrial radio where we came from, where everything was always like
The best.
You're listening to the best radio show in the world.
Number one.
Yeah. And everything was the best, and we're the best, and this is number one.
Number one in Orlando, whether we are or not.
And then we'd always laugh at that. It'd be like,
How about just being normal?
And I was like, I'm pretty sure Howard Stern is the best. Like you in a 14th market saying you're the best is stupid because you're not the best.
Yeah.
But we kind of always laughed at that, and the personality, and you guys know the egomaniacs that live in the radio world and even the TV. Like there's the narcissism
you guys
and stuff.
have dealt with it.
And and me and Daniel were never like that, and so we always like making fun of ourselves and just like having cool conversations and like being honest. And then we realized a long time ago, as long as we're honest and try not to be someone we're not and people we're not, like I make fun of myself so much, and Daniel does too, and he talks about his anxiety.
We're so flawed, we have to. We show.
I think that's what draws your listeners to you.
Yeah.
You're very real on the air. You're who you are. There's no facade. And I think that's what I was trying to say in you having a conversation with us when we didn't know who you were and you didn't know who we were. And, I think that's great. It's a great quality.
well, what else is a real compliment to you guys, Tom and Dan, is that our producer Dina would like to ask you a question.
That's huge. You have this is the first time we've ever heard her speak.
Yeah, we didn't know that she talked.
First of all, I just want to say, you guys, if they made a movie about podcasters, you would be, the basis, because it seems like you kind of are hitting the sweet spot by marrying, the intimacy, the authenticity of podcasting with, the fun and whimsy of, old school, morning radio type of stuff. So I'm, writing a screenplay in my mind right now. But my question is, so there's this this is on the top of my mind because I just rewatched The Fisher King, and there's the whole plot is based on what this guy says on the radio as an influential DJ, and then the reaction of his listeners, or one listener in particular. And there is a conversation right now, since Joe Rogan and everything, about the influence that podcasters have, and I'm just wondering if that's something that you guys think about, kind of a responsibility that you might feel like you have to your audience, and how you might negotiate that.
Well, the first thing we did during the pandemic is we found every bit of misinformation and we told our listeners to do it. I see
we're
what
the bleach. We heard about the bleach.
The Mectin. Give them the Mectin.
Put the light in your mouth.
But no, we do think about that a lot, but our show, we never really dip into things, and I think you'd agree with this.
Yeah,
we never get real serious. And we know that with our show, and especially in the state that we're in, that a lot of our listeners are going to be both people. We're going to have the most liberal people that want to listen to us, and we're going to have the most conservative people that want to listen to us. But at the end of the day, everybody just wants us to be us. So yeah, we do think about it, but we don't really dip our toe into much where we have to worry about our influence.
Yeah,
And you know that's probably very smart because in the dark world that we're living in, people want to be taken out of their heads. They don't need you reminding them about all the bad stuff in the world. So for an hour or so, or however long you're on, that you're giving them some relief, which is probably smart to stay out of the politics.
Well, there are things we won't broadcast. There are things we won't talk about. There are things we won't do. I mean, even our broadcast from 2012 till now has grown up. There are words we don't use anymore. There things that we would never think to do that we probably maybe would have just riffed on it.
Yeah, and we talk about how we're learning as and we change, but we do stay away from politics because we realized that's the most toxic thing you could get into. So we we do not talk about that. We stay away from like any controversial topics for the most part. But it's easy because me and Daniel don't really feel strongly about anything. What we feel strongly about is doing the right thing and being good people.
Just being good people.
And taking care of our families and wanting everybody to be happy. And so it's like it's easy for us because we're not hiding any agenda or like really it's kind of like we just want to live good lives and make people happy and it's like it's pretty simple to do that as long we don't have any like hey we have to push this or we want to influence this.
But I think a lot of podcasters, to answer a question a little more, I think a lot of podcasters get into it, try to get into it, want to get into it for the same reason you're talking about. They want to be that edgy person, and I think in a weird way we're watching podcasting, and I think you'll agree with this too, T, is that podcasting is kind of becoming what radio was when we were leaving it. Like we're seeing the same patterns kind of come along. We're looking at YouTube influencers, and Tom and I'll laugh and we'll see these guys doing like the old I've got 5 people and they all have their hand on a car, and then the one that keeps his hand on the car the longest, he'll get to win the car. And I'm like, oh my God, this is a radio bit from 1976.
Yeah, there's actually a great documentary about this, about like when they actually did this and I think that one is actually about like real people who were trying to win that car, not like a publicity stunt. But thanks for reminding me that I got to look up that documentary. But I do think that you guys are a positive influence, like overall, because you're real, because you're not afraid to be yourselves, and because you're like inspiring your audience that they can be authentic and happy that way, and they don't have to like meet anybody's standards, like society standards of like masculinity or anything like that.
Oh, that's a great point, I think. And I'm sorry, I apologize for cutting you off. I think social media has taught everybody that it's not okay to be flawed, right? Because every picture is great. Every vacation is wonderful. Every, people on a cruise ship, every girl has the tiniest waist. Every guy has abs. But at the end of the day, we all know that's not true in our hearts. But our show there's nothing like I'm a little guy. I can be a bad father sometimes. I can be a bad husband sometimes. I'm a real person. I'm flawed. I make mistakes. Yeah. You bumble and do things like we're just real.
And the comedy is in the flaw.
It really is.
We used to like when we were in radio, we used to get labeled as pessimists
or negative,
and we're like, well, there's nothing funny about telling a story about a vacation that I went on. And I'm like, I had a great time. Everything was like the what's funny. The comedy is in the tragedy.
Yeah. Have you ever seen anybody laugh at somebody walking upstairs?
That is an interesting point. That sort of on social media, the goal is to depict perfection, and then the goal in doing an entertaining radio show is to be honest about your flaws.
Yeah, I think this kind of comes back to the commercials you were talking about. Our commercials. If we make a flub, if I say "fuck" in the commercial, I leave it in because it's real, and that's what people want.
We've made mistakes. I've messed up we're trying to promote something. I've messed it up. Daniel's laughing at me. I'm like, I'm an idiot. And we'll just leave it in. We'll leave it in the commercial.
We did one recently where we got the name of the product or got the date wrong. It was horrible, but we left it in because we realized that was real, and we also realized that it's a happy accident. More people are going to remember us saying our own client that we're getting paid, saying their name wrong. Now, we did call them and say, hey, we're just going to say your name wrong.
But you said in the documentary, sometimes the business owner seizes that and understands the value in you guys being real, and it sells the product even better.
No one has ever not seen the value in it. I would tell you that.
Yeah.
Everyone has seen the value in it. No one has ever said, change that commercial, that's wrong, or you shouldn't have flubbed. No one, and I don't think they ever will because they know in our hearts we want to do, it's all in our intent, and Tom says that a lot. We want to do a good job for you, and you know we do.
And we realized no one cares about anything but money as long as it works. And as long as our listeners buy our advertisers' product or use them, that's all they care about.
That's our job.
Yeah. And so as long as it works, now if it doesn't work, we're screwed.
All right. Well, I would love to thank you so much for joining us. This has been just a really extraordinarily fascinating conversation because you guys are really, you are groundbreaking.
I appreciate that.
Pulling radio into the podcast space and kind of inspiring everyone who.
You're
We talk about
really
you
good
guys
at what
all
you
the
do. You're really good at what you do, guys.
Well, thank you.
You
The
guys
way-
are great at what you do because we've done interviews for other shows that, and you guys know this. We used to laugh at like a terrestrial radio where the host would have no clue, like zero prep work, like they wouldn't even barely know the guest's name.
They get it wrong sometimes.
And then, like the person would come in, and then it would be the generic questions like, "Thank you very much for, I mean, you didn't have to go
So
watch our
what can
documentary."
people expect with a Louise and Fritz podcast?
So
my God.
it's been a pleasure talking to you guys.
Well, here come our closing credits, and we're going to put all the fun stuff in the show notes of how to find you on Twitch and on Facebook and all of your
thank you
different
guys so much.
platforms. Thank you so much for joining us. We would love to continue this conversation with you on Instagram and Twitter. We are at MediaPathPod, and on Facebook, where our show page is MediaPath Podcast, and our Facebook group is MediaPath with Fritz and Wheezy Podcast Community. You can find full video podcast episodes loaded with bonus visual content on our YouTube channel, MediaPath Podcast. You can write to us at MediaPathPodcast@gmail.com. If you enjoy this show, please give us a nice rating in Apple Podcasts and talk about us nicely on social media, if you wouldn't mind. You can sign up for our fun and dishy newsletter. We don't really spam you, just the once a week. You can read it. It's okay. It's, the political ads are going to stop this week, so you go ahead and sign up. We want to thank our guests, Daniel Dennis and Tom Vann. Our team includes Dina Friedman, John Maddox, Sharon Bellio, Bill Filipiak, Thomas Hubble, Mason Brown, Garrett Arch, and you. Our theme music is by me and John Maddox. I'm Louise Palanker, here with Fritz Coleman and Tom and Dan, and we will see you along the media path.
Excellent, fellas. Hey, listen, if you hang out there for just a second, we're going to take a picture of us in front of the TV screen with you guys smiling so we can put it on social media.
Yeah.